At the church I go to, we have 3 live stream cameras that are installed out of reach. And I need a way to power cycle these cameras without getting out a ladder every time we want to do so. So I'm going to design a little module with 3 buttons on it that will power cycle these cameras. So let's design it. So when I first thought about this problem, I thought smart plugs. We could just put them on the network and power cycle them on and off using smart technology. But the problem with that is there's plenty of volunteers that are going to need to do this, and they would all need to have this plug in their account, and that presents a problem. So that's where the smart plug hack that I did in another video comes into play. So if you haven't watched that video, I'll link it in the description, and you can find out how to hack a smart plug to make it controllable by an outside button. So we're going to use 3 of these, 1 for each camera, and I'm going to design a module of buttons that will install in the sound booth that we can power cycle these cameras. So let's get started. The materials we need to make the circuit board portion of this are a prototype PCB board, 3 tactile buttons, 3 female JST plugs with through-hole pins so we can solder them to the circuit board, and some wire. First thing I want to do is figure out an even spacing for my buttons on the circuit board. Next, I'm going to mark the center of each button. The JST connectors will go on the back of the board here. We'll use the marks we made to locate them. Now that we know the layout of the board, let's start soldering on the JST connectors. I'll use 2 of the clips to hold the PCB board and push one up against the back of the JST connector to hold it in place. Now I'll solder each pin in place. Now I'll repeat that process for the other 2 JST connectors. Now that all the JST connectors are soldered into place, I'm going to insert 2 pass-through wires for each connector. These wires will connect the pins for the connectors on one side of the board to the pins on the button on the other side of the board. Now just make sure the wires are touching the connector pins and solder each wire to a connector pin. Now I'll trim the excess wire, leaving enough so it can be soldered to the button pins. Now we'll repeat that process for the other 2 connectors. Push the wires through. Solder them in place. And clip off the excess. Push the wires through. Solder them in place. And clip off the excess. Now we'll line up our buttons with the marks we made earlier and push the pins through the holes. And solder all 4 of the button pins to the board. Now we can repeat this process for the other 2 buttons. We'll push the button through the board and solder all 4 button pins to the board. Now we can push the 3rd button through the board and solder all 4 pins to the board. Now that we have the buttons in place, we need to bend the pass-through wires down to the button pins so we can solder them together. Now we'll solder each wire to its button pin. Now that all the connections are made, we can clip off all the excess wire. That completes the button circuit board assembly. Now let's jump into SolidWorks and design a housing for it. Okay, I got the parts off the printer and they look pretty good. So let's assemble this thing. We're going to need our button assembly and a couple screws to hold it all together. First, let's insert the button assembly into the housing. Buttons still work well. Now let's put the back into place. That fits really nice. Now we can secure it into place with 2 screws. Let's snug up our 2 screws. And now we have a complete 3-button switch. One thing I like about the way this thing came out is I printed it face down on the build plate and it made the face of it come out real nice looking. Okay, I'm here in the sound booth at my church and we're going to install the switch. So I already have all the cables ran, one from each camera, one on the right and one on the left and one in the balcony. And we're going to install the switch right up underneath the rail here on the sound booth. That way we can push these buttons and turn the power on and off to the cameras without getting on ladders and going up in the balcony every morning or evening when we want to turn them on. So let's install the switch. Okay, first thing we want to do is mark the holes where we want it. I think that looks good. Set back just a hair right there. So I'm going to mark those. Okay, now I got that one started. Okay. Get the other side started. Now plug in the different switches. Okay, so let's test this out. So here is the camera controller here, and I'll press all three switches and you'll see they will all three come on. Left, balcony, and right. Takes a little while from the power up, but there's the left and the right, and there's the balcony. Looks like it works good. Now we can turn them all off by pressing the switches again. Hope you enjoyed this project. I did, and I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and please like and subscribe, and there'll be a lot more to come. If you'd like to get the project files or any of that type of stuff, it's over at my website, link in the description, dandesigns3d.com. You can download the 3D files and get a list of all the materials I used and more information and all that stuff. So see you in the next video.